So just before we begin, my name is Cynthia Holt. I am the manager for CAUL, in case you don't know me yet. I'd like to acknowledge that CAUL-CBUA members are situated on the traditional and unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq, Innu, Inuit, and Wolastoqey peoples. I also have some, before I introduce our speaker, I also have a few housekeeping items to share. You're muted by default when you come in. If you want to speak, just unmute yourself. But we ask that, well, if you're not speaking, to keep yourself muted to decrease the amount of background noise we get in the session. The session is being recorded, so I wanted to give everybody that heads up. We always record the sessions so that we can put them up on the CAUL website. And Corinne has asked, because she has there's a lot of stuff she needs to get through. If you could hold your questions to the end of the session, that would be great. There will be time for questions at the end, and if she doesn't get to your questions, then to some of your questions, if we go beyond the time, then we will definitely ensure that there is follow-up for those questions. And I know some folks, when they registered, had listed some things they wanted to learn about in the session that may fall outside the scope of this session, but there are plans to have future sessions on other related topics, so you can always send those along to me or to Corinne later on. And so just in terms of speaking, other than audio, you can also use the chat to the left of your screen. It has looks like a little dialog box. If you click on that, that'll open the chat on the left of your screen. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Corinne Gilroy, who is the Manager of Access Services at Mount St. Vincent University and also the Layout Editor at the Partnership Journal. Corinne is going to walk us through today an expanded version of the session she did for us at the Accessibility Forum on making PDFs accessible. So take it away, Corinne.
Thank you, Cynthia. Hi, everybody. I'm so delighted to see 28 people here for this very important but kind of niche topic. So that's very edifying. So as Cynthia mentioned, I could literally talk about PDF accessibility and all the bells and whistles in Adobe Acrobat all day. So I won't waste any time. I'm going to move ahead on my slideshow here. How do I move ahead on my slideshow? Oh, geez. Okay. There we go. Okay, so the focus of this session will be on scanning from print and adding accessibility features to scan PDFs in Adobe Acrobat Pro 11. So I have version 11 on my work computer. And I should point out that born digital documents such as electronic journal articles, ebooks, word processor documents, PDFs created from word processors and publishers are usually, not always, but usually more accessible than documents that are scanned from print copies. So if you have the option to not scan, that's always what I would recommend. So as much as this is a webinar about scanning, it's also a webinar about not scanning and only using that as a last resort, because there's so much detail and that goes into improving one of these documents. So regarding electronic documents, of course, we should encourage vendors and database owners to make their documents more accessible whenever possible. They should have OCR text or e-text, not flat PDF images, which I still see in databases we subscribe to occasionally. And of course, we don't want to see those behind a wall of DRM. There's not much point in downloading an accessible PDF that students then can't do anything with. And I do think that we should point it out to vendors and publishers that accessible documents are hidden within inaccessible websites or platforms that do not themselves cooperate with screen readers. You can have the best, most accessible PDF in the world, and if it's hidden in a platform that doesn't cooperate with the software that students who have print disability are using, then it's just not very useful. So I would like to point out as well that with born digital documents that you might create yourself, say a Word document that you want to turn into a PDF, if you have Adobe Acrobat on your computer, there's a plugin for Adobe Acrobat that actually can live inside Word, and that adds bookmarks and other basic accessibility features as the document is rendered into PDF. That's what we use at at the partnership, we start off with Word documents and then move them over into Adobe Acrobat. But we render a lot of that initial rendering is done in Word. And of course, you can enhance the accessibility of many electronic documents by following some of the procedures that I'm going to outline. And of course, I'm outlining them as it applies to scanned documents, but you can still go into Adobe Acrobat with a born digital document, say a Word document that's been converted into a PDF, and make it even better, make it even more accessible, make it even more usable, right? It all depends on how much time you have to devote to the task as well. And I would like to give a plug to screen readers themselves. They're not just for students who have or patrons who have print disabilities. They're also really useful in terms of assessing the work you're doing, right? So the link that you see on your screen here, naturalreaders.com/online, is just a link to a screen reader app that was recommended by our accessibility office here at MSVU. So if you're producing documents that you would like to be accessible, that you want to test the optical character recognition or text recognition in a document, you can use a screen reader. You can use it to test a website that you're putting together, that sort of thing, to make sure that it's intelligible if you can't see it or can't see it well. Okay, so I'm going to move ahead on my slide here. So I'm framing most of this session as a kind of PDF scanning workshop, and I think there's a lot of important questions that go into PDF scanning before you even actually scan your document. So as I've already briefly mentioned, the first question I really think everyone should ask themselves is, do I actually have to scan this, or do I have other options? I always think the other options are better because scanning is so persnickety and there are so many things you need to do to make a flat scan image work for people who have print disabilities. So is licensed or free e-text available, right? Because of course born digital documents are usually, not always again, but usually more accessible than scanned documents. And can I scan this effectively? So is it a clean copy with no marks, no highlights that obstruct the text? Are the gutters wide enough that the scanner can read every word of the text? And how's the print quality? Is it a pulpy mimeograph that's been copied over and over again into a tiny paperback, or is it really crisp, clean, high contrast, right? And I'm going to show you an image of a couple of things that you don't want to see. So these are things to look out for. So these are the two images you see here are just images that I actually asked one of my reserves library technicians to provide me with a couple that she's seen recently that are really poor quality documents that she's had to work with in reserves. Because of course the reserves and document delivery staff at MSVU do perform at least basic OCR on documents before we send them out or put them online. So in the left-hand PDF, you can see the gutters are a mess. There's a lot of shadow because the very center of the book, basically the inside of the spine, can't sit closely enough to the scanning bed to really pick up those characters well, and so that obscures a lot of the text, and that's difficult if not impossible to get a good OCR out of. And as well, that text is lower quality. It's kind of blotchy. It's been copied a lot, either that or it's from a low quality copy that the library actually own. I'm not sure which is the case, but it's not very clear. It's really hard for the computer to quote unquote read that and turn it into legible text. And in the right-hand example, you'll actually see that the pages are very thin. You can see the following page through the current page, and that can create distortion in the text, and it's quite low contrast. You can see that the background is quite gray and the text is quite pale. So these, again, are things to look out for, things you absolutely want to avoid. Documents like this, if this is the kind of scan you're getting, you're going to want to look at other options, and I'm going to talk about a couple more of those in a minute here. So if the document isn't fit to scan, what are your options? For reserves, for instance, is a better copy available from an instructor? Sometimes our instructors provide us with photocopies they've already made, and they aren't experts in the field of photocopying. They're experts in other fields. So often their copies are not very good, but they might have a beautiful desk edition sitting in their office. Or can you put in a document delivery request for the item? Does one of your partner libraries have it on hand so that you can actually copy it yourself from a print edition rather than relying on someone else's photocopy or, say, a copy that's been damaged? Would your library consider purchasing a new print copy? And for a student with a print disability, are there supports available at your institution from your accessibility office? So do you really need to just use a scan, or is there, say, a student worker affiliated with the accessibility office who could provide dictation, make an audio recording, or transcribe the document for you? That might be an option depending on your resources. So this is where we get a little bit more into the meat and potatoes here. So effective scanning, there's an art to it, an art and a science. So MSVU library staff, just to give you a little context of the library that I work in and the team that I manage, MSVU library staff use a networked Konica multifunction printer, scanner, and copier. Most institutions in Nova Scotia, I believe, are on the same contract. So we do not use a traditional flatbed scanner that would be attached to a workstation. And using one of these big multifunction printer, scanner, copiers gives us a much higher speed and much better size options, right? We have a much bigger, much more landscape to work with, right? So I would recommend choosing appropriate scan dimensions for both pages in the case of copying a book or a bound journal. So copying the left and right pages at the same time. That might require upping the size of your scan from letter size up to maybe B4 or A3. These are some of the larger, more tabloid sizes. And that way you can get through the work of standing at the scanner and copying every page much more quickly. I would also recommend 600 by 600 DPI, or dots per inch, which improves OCR down the road. Once we get into Adobe, you'll have much better luck if you have a really high resolution image. But of course, with higher resolution comes a much larger size. So you may decide that your longer chapters or excerpts, say it's a single chapter that's 60 pages of a quite lengthy book, you may need to split that up into 2 or 3 pieces. But it's easy using Acrobat Pro. I'm not going to go into this part because it's not integral to the workshop, but it is fairly easy to knit together multiple PDFs into a single PDF. So that can certainly be done. And you may want to consider sending your files to a networked folder rather than your email. Often these larger emails with big PDFs in them will bounce depending on the settings at your institution. And you'll want to hold your pages as flat and steady as possible and keep them flush to the edge of the scanning glass. So you want to make sure every page is scanned in the same place on the scanning plate so that when we're working in an Adobe cropping, we can actually crop everything at once. You can crop all the pages in one click, essentially. And if you're worried you skipped a page, I would say don't start over. All is not lost. It is actually quite easy to delete an extra page in Acrobat if necessary. So it's better to doubt yourself and scan it twice than to skip or start again. And pardon me, either the first or last page of your scan, I usually do it as the first page, should be the cover page for the monograph or the journal that you're working with. I think that's helpful for everyone. I really like to meld accessibility features and universal design. So if it's good for one group of students or stakeholders, it's often good for another. So everyone can benefit from having that bibliographic data available when they're working on their research papers, for instance. And I would also suggest including endnotes in a book chapter if you have the opportunity to do so. So those are often pretty important for what our patrons are doing. So I'm going to bounce from PowerPoint over into Adobe Acrobat now. So give me a second here. Okay. All right, so today we're going to be working with this document. So this is the initial PDF that I'm working with. So just a couple things before I bounce back into PowerPoint. I just wanted to show you this to illustrate what my scans look like when I start. So you can see that my scanning area is substantially larger than the book itself, but I want to make sure that nothing gets cut off accidentally if I move my page at all. So you can see there's substantial black kind of gutter space on the left and on the bottom. And I've scanned 2 pages at once in every case, and you can see my arm and the book jacket on various pages. Oh, and of course, yes, the first page is the cover page here, because again, I think that's really useful to students, faculty, etc. And this is a 600 by 600 DPI scan. And I've also included the endnotes, and it's a little bit crooked here on this page, for instance, but we can tidy that up in Adobe as we go. So I'll show you how to do that. But I just wanted to show you what a good scan doesn't always start off looking beautiful, but there's a lot of work that you need to do once you get into Adobe. So I'm going to go back to PowerPoint now. That little lightning bolt, by the way, is a reminder to me to to check or to move over into Adobe. So onto a little more workshop-y stuff. So of course you should process your scan, and I'm going to go through this very quickly, and then I'm going to go through each step in more detail. So please don't feel like you have to take notes on this or anything. I'm going to go back over it in more detail. So to begin with, again, process your scan in Adobe Acrobat Pro, not Adobe Reader. So Adobe Reader is free, and it's very functional, and we of course recommend it to our students for printing PDFs and so on. But please don't mistake the two. So Adobe Acrobat Pro is paid. It's paid licensed software. It's a full function PDF editor. I believe that PDFs were actually created by the Adobe corporation, so you literally have access to every possible feature in your PDF, every bit of metadata, everything hiding in the background, every bit of coding. And again, it includes a Microsoft Word plugin that's very, very useful if you're producing journal articles, for instance. So the first few steps that we want to do in Adobe Acrobat is that we want to add metadata. So we want to add title, author, language. We want to duplicate and crop our pages, set page numbers to reflect the book and journal pagination, and then of course the most important part, adding optical character recognition, otherwise known as text recognition, or OCR. And once we get these first 4 steps done, this is usually sufficient for general requests, right? So if you're getting requests in from reserves from faculty to post to your learning management system, for instance, or you're processing document delivery requests, and in my opinion, this is usually sufficient. We have a lot of material to get through. We often are dealing with dozens of these requests every day. And a lot of the really wonderful bells and whistles that we can add to make a highly accessible document, just it's a matter of workload, right? So if we want to get into more, and this is the really cool stuff, right? The stuff that you can do to make a document super cooperative with a screen reader and to make it very, very useful to a student who has, or a faculty member, or any patron or stakeholder who has a print disability. You want to go through the document once you've added OCR and delete all the little scanning artifacts. So the OCR engine in Adobe needs to do something with every little scribble in the margin and every shadow, every mote of dust. So you're going to want to go through and delete those so that it's not reading those as images, because that takes away from the time that a screen reader should be spending actually reading the article or the book chapter to the student or patron. And you want to clean up reading order. Again, I'm going to go over this in more detail. And you'll want to add alt text to all your images and figures, just so that someone who is blind or visually impaired or has another print disability understands what they're looking at when their screen reader gets to an image or picture, right? How does the screen reader describe that image or picture to the patron? And you'll want to add bookmarks for navigation so that anyone using the document can bounce around to various parts of the document. And they can see how the document's divided up into various sections. And then Adobe has a wonderful accessibility checker that is exhaustively detailed, but that's really where I learned most of this, was going through the accessibility checker and trying to get it all right, trying to kind of quote unquote make 100% in the accessibility checker. Oh, I have a little red X here, I'll fix this. Oh, I can do this better, I'll fix this. And I'll go through that in a little bit more detail as the last line of this slide says. So back to Adobe. So at this point, I'm going to show you what the end product looks like. So this is actually my completed PDF. So we have the title page again, but the hand scribbled call number I've actually replaced with typed text because it wasn't rendering properly and it was just getting confusing. And I'll go through some of the pages, and you can see that the double pages have all been turned into single pages. And all of the images actually have alt text. So if you can see my cursor, which I'm not sure you can, this image, for instance, the alt text is a description followed by the figure caption. So it says, a mid-20th century illustration of a woman sitting at a computing machine with a logo from Vickers News at the bottom of the illustration. And then I've added the caption as well, which is figure 1.1, the Power Girl was an advertising mascot of Powers, Samas, and so on and so forth. I deliberately picked a chapter with a few illustrations because from my earlier session at the forum, one of the pieces of feedback I got was to have a little more detail into how to process or deal with alt text. So I'm going to go back to the beginning here, and all of those dozen steps that I just showed you, I'm going to go over these in quite a bit more detail. So to begin, adding metadata to your document, that's the very first thing I would recommend doing, adding metadata, saving it at a good location, so on and so forth. So we can go into File and Properties, and under the Description tab, I would recommend setting title and author in the very least. You can certainly add subjects or keywords, but that's often, I would say it's a little more, it's more subjective, no pun intended, and it might be a little bit beyond the scope of the duties of some of your staff, depending on their expertise with the material they're working on. It could be that only a faculty member could provide accurate keywords for this document. It might be quite esoteric, right? And we'll want to go over to the Initial View tab and make sure that we are showing the document title. So there's a Show drop-down box, and we want to see the document title. That's an accessibility feature that I don't fully understand. It makes the title show up at the top of the screen. I'm not sure why that's tied to accessibility, but it is something that my accessibility checker will complain about if I don't do it properly. And in the Advanced tab, we want to make sure we set the language. This is very important. Otherwise, a screen reader might not know how to read the text. I would say a lot of these programs have are smart enough to figure out that a document is written in X, Y, or Z language, but Adobe still recommends that we deliberately set the language to English or whatever the case may be. So the next thing we'll want to do is to duplicate and crop pages. Now, of course, I've already done this in this version of the document, so I'll bounce back to the initial copy and show you very briefly how this is done. So to duplicate, we would open the page thumbnails from the left-hand menu. So this menu will give you a thumbnail for each and every page on the document. And if you want to duplicate a page, you simply click on the page, you press your Control key on your keyboard, and you drag the page down. So now you'll see we'll have two copies of the title page. So like so. And then once we've done that with every page, and I would recommend going through and making sure that you have 2 copies of each and every page, because we're going to be cropping the odd pages and then cropping the even pages. So you would select the first page of the document and then go back over to the Tools menu, go to Pages, and Crop. Right, so that's one of the options in the right-hand menu is Pages, Crop. Now you can quite easily drag and drop with your, or pardon me, drag with your mouse to select, drag and select, pardon me, the left-hand pages or the quote-unquote odd pages, and then press your Enter key on your keyboard, and that'll bring up another menu. And we would want to select how many pages. Now, if you're doing this for an entire document, you would do from pages 1 to whatever the last page is in your document. And it should really be always an even number, but I've only done an example here and duplicated 1 page for you. And you would duplicate either all the even pages or all the odd pages. And this takes some practice. I'm not going to pretend that it's the most intuitive process in the world, but once you get the hang of it, it saves so much time versus scanning every page twice at the photocopier. It's lickety split. So I'm going to press cancel here because I actually know what why not? I'll just do it. So there's what a crop looks like of the first odd page, and then I can do a crop of the first even page following the same procedure. All right, so we'd have some preamble here that I would probably delete this page because it's just a little bit of information about the series of books that this book chapter is from, so not necessarily relevant to, say, a reserves course. And then this is the actual title page itself, so very important. Okay, so once you've duplicated every page and cropped every page so you have all the odd pages and all the even pages, you would just go through and make sure there's no duplicates, make sure everything is in order. And then the next thing is to set your page numbers. So once you actually have your pages all in order, of course, that's the easiest time to set page number metadata. And page numbers are pretty easy, but again, it's something that I would say requires a little bit of practice, and it's easy to mess up, but you can also undo it easily or start over. So again, working from the Page Thumbnails tab on the left-hand menu, you would right-click, and with the little pop-up menu, you would go to Number Pages. And I like to start with using Roman numerals for any preamble if I'm using putting the title page at the beginning, for instance. And you can tell Adobe Acrobat where to start and where to end these ranges. So you can select the pages you want and tell Adobe how to number them. So you may not, I'm not sure how much you can see in detail on your screen depending on the size of your monitor, but I have the title page set as Roman numeral I or 1, and then the first page of the chapter I have set as page 19, 20, and so on. And then the endnotes, I've accurately reflected the pagination in the book for the endnotes as well. So the endnotes start with page 250, continuing into page 258. So of course, really the point here is to make sure that students and other patrons who are possibly using this material for research can cite things accurately, right? If it's page 19 in the book and a student who is sighted or non-print disabled is able to understand that it's page 19 or 20, there's no reason that a student who has print disability shouldn't be able to do the same thing. And having the page numbers in the metadata rather than just visual on the page itself can help students' software to be able to provide that information to them a little bit more easily. So once we have the page numbers, the next thing that I would recommend doing is adding optical character recognition to your document. And again, keep in mind we're working as a finished document here, so optical character recognition is already present, but I'll show you where it is in the right-hand menu here. So under the right-hand tools menu, you would click on text recognition, and you would click in this file. And that pulls up a little dialog box asking you for a range, all page, current pages, etc. And then there's some advanced settings that you can set as well, and I would recommend popping into the advanced settings menu and setting that. So primary OCR language, probably going to be English for most of us, possibly French, possibly another language. Clear scan is definitely the PDF output style that I would suggest. So I didn't really understand the difference between clear scan and searchable image until I was doing the research for my previous presentation for the CAUL forum. But basically what clear scan does is replace the pictures of words with actual electronic text. So rather than having a picture of, say, the word apple with that has all of the very detailed image of that word that was rendered through the scanning process, it'll take that out and put in instead characters, which of course take up a lot less space. So you'll end up with a much smaller document. So to give you a comparison there and how much difference that makes, my original scan coming off of our Konica copier here at work was 7 megabytes. But when I finished all of the OCR rendering with clear scan, it went down to 2 megabytes. So that's very, very significant for anyone who's working with a learning management system, sending documents via document delivery. Of course, you want as high a resolution as possible, but you also want the smallest file size possible. So clear scan really, I think, presents a very effective compromise, and you end up with more legible text in a lot of cases. So I won't press the OK button here because, of course, I can't and won't re-render OCR on a document that already has OCR. But what would happen if you did that is you would click OK, and the document goes through this really fun to watch process of every single page being aligned so that it's perfectly horizontal and vertical. Everything's at 0 degrees and 90 degrees. All the text is very straight, and you can kind of see Adobe thinking. It's sort of fun, and it takes a few minutes. So you can go have a washer break, grab a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and come back, and your document should be ready for you to add some of the more sophisticated accessibility features. I'm going to press cancel here and move out. Okay. So again, for general scanning requests, this is probably as much as we would do here at the Mount. If it's not coming specifically from the accessibility office, or it's not a student who is self-identified to us as requiring an alternate format, this is as far as we can go. Most students, I think, have either personal or institutional access to the software that they would need to do more with it. We do get comments from a lot of students who, for one reason or another, and it could be a print disability or it might be a learning disability that's not directly connected to print, they might use a screen reader to just help with their workflow and help with their learning style. And simply providing a bit of metadata and adding OCR is often enough for that to be fairly effective and efficient for them. But of course, that's not the fun stuff. The fun stuff is when you want to make it perfect, right? I do anyway. I really enjoy this. It's very satisfying once you go through everything. So to make it as good as possible and as accessible as possible, the next thing we're going to want to do is to review the document and delete scanning artifacts, shadows, scratches, dust, etc. So the tool you would want to use for that is going into content editing and edit text and images. So as soon as you click on edit text and images in the right-hand menu, you'll notice that all of the little elements, and I think that is what Adobe calls them, as elements, all the elements in the document are going to have little borders around them. So it basically shows you how Adobe understands your document. And you'll see odd little borders that show up in the corners. So I've deleted them from this document, but you'll when you first run this process with the scan document, you'll see little squares around scratches of dust or little squares around shadows in the margins, and you will want to go through and delete as many of those as possible. And most of that can be done manually. But if the document is a little bit messier, or if you want to get into more detailed cleanup, you can also go over to the Content tab in the left-hand menu. So I'll click on that for you just to show you what it looks like. So again, Content is over in the left where we saw those thumbnails, and the Content tab is tremendously detailed. Every single page has a series of containers and elements and annotations, and what you want to really be on the lookout for are pages that seem to have have images that don't actually have images. So I'm going to find a page with images for you. So this one, for instance, is page 23 as it's paginated, but page 6 according to the actual document. So for instance, here on the side, and again, this is very tiny, so I apologize if you can't see it effectively. If I expand the meaty coded content of this page in this document, I can see that there is an image, and we would expect that here because, of course, it's this illustration of this woman sitting at this antique computer doing some work, some hole punching, that sort of thing. And we would expect to see an image here. But if you have artifacts hanging out in your document, dust, shadows, etc., then you're going to see a lot more of these little images. And you can actually click on them here and delete them straight away, and it'll be removed from your PDF completely. So if you want to make it perfectly clean, this is the place to do it. But of course, please proceed with caution, because you could end up very easily accidentally deleting content that your patrons need to read or view. So tread with caution, but this is definitely where to go if you want to be very detail oriented about it. So the next thing we're going to want to do is clean up the reading order of the page. So the reading order of the page basically tells a screen reader what order to read the text to someone in. And this just requires a little bit of imagination and maybe a throwback to your childhood in order to do effectively. So what you want to do is think about what you would actually say if you're reading the document aloud to someone. So you would not, for instance, read the headers and footers of every page, have the page number, and often the title of the book or the title of the chapter is showing up in either the header or the footer. You would not read that every time you got to it. So you will want to set those as background, for instance, so the screen reader would skip them, because remember, we already accounted for page numbers in metadata. We've already accounted for the title of the book and the title of the chapter in metadata. We don't need to remind someone using a screen reader of that every single time they switch a page, right? You wouldn't do that if you were reading it aloud to a friend or a classmate, for instance. So in reading order, there's a little drop-down menu near the top of the order panel. And again, this is showing up in the left-hand menu. And we can click Show Reading Order Panel. And this is very cool, actually. So once the reading order panel is visible, all you need to do is use your cursor and highlight something, and then you would tell Adobe how to understand it. Is it just body text, or is it a figure, right? So this figure here, you can see that earlier when I rendered this document and did the processing on it, I selected the figure and the caption together. And then I selected figure/caption from the reading order menu. And pardon me, and then I went in and added the alt text later, which I'll get to momentarily. I'm going to switch pages here so we can see how this really works. On the very first page of the body text, when I went to do touch-up reading order, I selected the title of the chapter, and then I clicked heading 1. So of course we want our headings to be nested, the most important heading being the title of the chapter. It gets a level 1 heading. And then 2 pages later, we have a smaller heading. And as you're going through and doing reading order, you would highlight that that header, and then set it as heading 2. And depending on how complex your document is, you can go all the way down from heading 1 or H1, which some of you might recognize from working in HTML or XML, all the way into heading 6 would be the most nested headings, right? So it's going from the largest to the smallest, really, if you were thinking of it visually in terms of HTML, but really the most important, the biggest headings to little subsections of the text. And you would want to be very careful about doing this in order, and the numbers that you'll see only when you have the reading order tab pulled up, those numbers actually reflect the order in which the screen reader would read this to a person. So it's really, again, very intuitive. Just think of how you would read it aloud to someone, what they would need to understand. So alt text, which I know everyone has been very excited and waiting for. And I apologize for making you wait for that. So alt text is done through some options in the right-hand menu again. So we would go to accessibility over in the right-hand menu, and we would simply click on set alternate text. And then this little window will come up. Adobe will detect all figures in this document and display associated alternate text. Now, if you've done your homework and done your preliminary work very well and very carefully, the only things that are going to come up here are going to be legitimate images, right? So ones that you've specifically marked off when you've gone through the reading order as, you know, this is an image, this is something that's significant to the text, this is not an artifact, it's not a decoration, it's not background, and Adobe should go through. Now, if you click OK here, and it's pointing to images that are extraneous, that aren't real images, like they're one of these artifacts, or it's something that's a decoration or background, then I would actually recommend clicking cancel and going back in and going back over some of these steps. So go through the reading order again, maybe a little bit more carefully, look at the content tab from the left, and look at the content tab on the left and go through some of the content and look for extraneous or unnecessary images, right? Something that Adobe might understand as an image that's not. Occasionally you might get a little bit of important text that's mistakenly understood as an image because it's in an unusual font, or it's much larger or smaller than the other text on the page, or a little bit of dust on your scanner could obscure that. And go through that again with a fine-tooth comb, because once you get to this point of setting alternate text for the images, you're not going to want to fuss with all these other things. But there is an option in here too to click decoration so that it will skip it. But I really think it's better to take care of that stuff before you get to this step. All your ducks should be in a row by this point. So again, I'm going to click cancel here because I can't re-render these images in a document. But I did want to make a point about what good alternate text is. And this is something that I'm still learning about as someone who's come into this skill set, just kind of happenstance over the years, just other things that needed to be done. It's something that had to be done, is that good alternate text is not the same as a caption. So good alternate text should tell you what the image actually looks like. It should describe the style and content, but it's not about an evaluation or a judgment of the image. And you may want to include the caption as well, but it's not the same kind of thing. It would almost be a little more like describing the image so that someone else could maybe do a simple drawing of it, or could imagine what the image looks like, right? So we also want to add bookmarks for easy navigation. And I should point out here, and you should see my list of bookmarks now in the left-hand panel. I've already created them. If you are working with a born digital document, say a Word document that you would like to turn into a PDF, if you use the little Adobe widget in Word, it will create these bookmarks for you as long as you have used nested header styles in Word. So that can save you a lot of time if you're working with something from scratch. But of course, if you're scanning a document, Adobe has no clue where the bookmarks are actually supposed to be, or what's nested, or how the hierarchy of a chapter in a journal article or a book chapter actually works. So these are very simple to create. It's kind of fun. all you really need to do is highlight a piece of text that's going to serve as a bookmark. So of course you would start with, again, with the title page and have that be, pardon me, the title page, not the first page of the chapter. You would have the title, the actual title of the document be the highest level bookmark, so kind of an H1, and go to the chapter of the book, because perhaps you're scanning 2 chapters for someone. Perhaps that fits within your institution's fair dealing guidelines, for instance. So if you're scanning 2 chapters, of course, you would want to make sure that the title of each chapter is set as an H2, or 1 level down in the hierarchy, and then all these little section headings, you would set them at the equivalent of an H3. So once you create a new heading, you can actually drag them within this hierarchy to pull them in or out of the hierarchy and nest them appropriately. So it's not too dissimilar to how you would nest folders in Windows or in, say, Outlook. So depending on exactly how you drag and drop them, and it's something that you really have to play with to get the hang of, but you can either pull them further into the hierarchy, out of the hierarchy, have them nest underneath this header, nest underneath that header, and it's just something to play with and really get the feel of. It's not, I can't really describe how it feels. It's a bit of one of those riding a bike things, right? And last but not least, definitely not least, this is where the gratification comes in. This is the accessibility checker. So under the accessibility tab in in Adobe Acrobat, there is full check. So you can click on full check, and you'll get a pop-up box with some parameters. And I would say check them all. Let it be as hard on you as you can handle, and then click Start Checking. And I'll actually run this one. I'll show you what you get. So the accessibility checker will show the results of the check will show up in the left-hand menu. So again, the checker itself, to run it, is found in the right-hand menu. You bounce over to the left-hand menu to look at the results. And you can expand the results into various categories. And the really beautiful thing about this accessibility checker is that if anything comes up that you're not sure of, you don't understand, why is it giving me a question mark, why is it giving me a big red X and scolding me, you can right-click on any of these accessibility features and click Explain, which would bounce you over to an Adobe help document on the Adobe website. And for the most part, those help documents are tremendous. Like, that is, to me, why we pay for this software, is that the help documents and tutorials are really, really detailed, and they give a lot of the rationale of what this means to someone who has a print disability, why this is an important accessibility feature, why you would want to add this to your document, and so on. And with some of them as well, there is an option to quote unquote fix. So you'll actually just see the word fix in the little menu that pops up when you right click. And that will bounce you to that particular tool in Adobe Acrobat and give you the option to correct your mistake right there, because it could be that you just missed something. Maybe you just forgot to add your bookmarks, or you forgot to add alt text to one image, for instance, or you forgot something in your reading order. So I would recommend running the check. Don't be discouraged if you get a lot of red X's in your checker. That is an opportunity to learn, and it gets better and better, and you can run it as many times as you want. There's no restriction on it. I ran this checker probably 6 times to produce this PDF that has a couple of that you have to check manually. Right, you would want to check to make sure the reading order is logical. That's something that really only a human can determine. And the color contrast. I know that I have a good solid monochrome document here that's fairly high contrast, and that someone could easily swap negative and positive and get a nice black background on. But the rest are all things that, it's just about learning. It's any of those little red X's are just an opportunity to figure something else out, and that again is one of those riding a bike things. You have to be patient with Adobe and listen to what it has to tell you, and let yourself learn. So I'm going to bounce over to PowerPoint again. Okay, so I got a lot of feedback on, or pardon me, comments from people who registered for this session, things that they really like to see in the session. And as Cynthia mentioned earlier, a lot of it is outside the scope of what I'm really able to do, what I have expertise in, because I'm not trained as an accessibility expert. I spent some time working at a special library that that focused on students who have disabilities. And when I moved over to MSVU, my first job was in reserve. So of course we were, working a lot with professors and making sure that material we were putting up online was as accessible as it could be given workload and staffing levels and so on. But now, of course, I'm in charge of everything related to access services at the Mount. So my team, which includes access services which includes reserves and document delivery, as well as someone working in the archives, we do our best to produce high quality scans, right? So garbage in, garbage out, quality in, quality out. If you start with a good quality scan, you're in business. And we add OCR and some of the metadata that I mentioned. And I really do think that this is it's a universal design thing. It's helpful to all patrons. I can't even count how many times I've Control F in any document that I used for a research paper as a student. And of course, most students with print disabilities have some kind of personal or institutional access to software that can properly parse and process a high quality scan that has OCR. But where we can, when we know that someone has a print disability, or we know that someone is registered with the Accessibility Services Office, we do like to take the time to make these documents even better. And the library and the print shop and our accessibility office, I would like to mention, we've teamed up on a new repository for alternate format requests. It's just kind of getting rolling this semester, but we're collecting these requests as they come in. We're keeping a log of them, and the alternate format PDFs we're keeping in a secure location, so that if another student with a legitimate request for alternate format, another student who has a disability and is registered with the Accessibility Office, if they need the same document, and of course, these do often come up in patterns or in clusters, then we can provide that to them very quickly. We know that it's high quality. So that's all I have for my presentation, and I'm absolutely delighted to see that I'm 7 minutes under my deadline, so I would be delighted to take questions.
So, excuse me, if you want to ask a question verbally, just unmute yourself and go, or otherwise there's the chat on the left side.
And please feel free to contact me directly. I know some of the questions you have might be something that I can answer, but that would take a long time to explain, or might be better to explain in writing, or with screen captures, or meeting in person. That all of those are options. Happy to help.
Anybody have any questions?
That's either very good or very bad.
I do have a quick one for you, Corinne. Do you have a documented workflow that you use, like that you might be able to share with others?
Oh, well, actually, I was going to suggest, Cynthia, if you would like to share my webinar notes was one of the files that I sent to you.
Okay.
And the details of what I was saying are there. And you're welcome to share that with others. It's really just a written version of what I've said here, but that is the workflow I go through.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Terry has a question in the chat. She was wondering if you could show the Adobe plugin on Word, if possible.
Sure. Yeah, I can take a second to do that. Just give me a moment here. So can everyone see Word now? Can you let me know?
Yep.
Okay. So once you have Adobe Acrobat installed, you actually end up with an Acrobat tab in Word. So you have your Home tab, Insert, Design, etc. And the Acrobat tab is one of the tabs. So, so what you do, and actually, you know what I'll do? I'll go open a partnership document, since I'm, partnership journal editor. Just give me a second here. Okay, so here is one of the one of the Word documents that one of my responsibilities for the Partnership Journal is to produce PDFs from these and then add accessibility features so that the PDFs are a little bit more useful to anyone who might happen upon the journal. So in the Acrobat tab, I would go to Preferences and Bookmarks. This is really important. So Preferences, Bookmarks. I have a whole other style sheet that I use for the Partnership Journal. So I have specifically told the Acrobat plugin in Word to create bookmarks from specific styles. So I want bookmarks created from my abstract title style. I want a bookmark for my bibliographic title style, my header 2 style, header 3, header 4, etc. My keyword title style, and I can set what the level of those are over on the left, or pardon me, on the right here. So you can set your title as level 1, set your main headers as level 2, set your subheaders as level 3, and so on. And then, as I alluded to earlier, once that bounces over into Adobe Acrobat, your bookmarks will already be in place, and all you would need to do is give them a visual check and make sure that they've nested properly and you haven't missed any of them. But of course, it does require using Word the quote-unquote right way, and I know a lot of people don't bother with using styles in Word. They will just say, oh, I want it bold, I want it bigger. But accessibility is a really good reason to use title styles and header styles properly in Word, and universal design and just basic document navigation is another good reason to do that. So once you have those set up in Word, they stick around, which is great, because I wouldn't want to do that over and over again, having to go through and add all of the title and header styles. I'll cancel out of that. But the other important thing to know about the Adobe Acrobat plugin in Word is that once it's in place, you do not go to File, Save as Adobe PDF. So you don't want to do that because it won't pull in that extra functionality. So you actually want to use the plugin to create the PDF. So rather than going File, Save as PDF, which I think is what most people do in most cases, and I understand why, you go over to the Adobe tab, you click Create PDF, and it looks deceptively the same, but if you use the plugin option for creating a PDF, it will add all of those header styles, and you'll get a more accessible document right out of the gate, so you have a little bit less to do when you're actually working in Adobe Acrobat. And the plugin works pretty well. It does crash occasionally, very occasionally. I've only had it happen a couple times, but the important thing is to let it run when you reopen Word. Otherwise, you'll wonder where it went, because it literally will just disappear. So that's a little hiccup of it, but I mean, Microsoft doesn't like to play nice with anything. So I think that's probably more a Microsoft Office problem than an Adobe problem. I hope that answered your question, Terry. Oh, there we go. Okay, excellent. Thanks so much. There we go. Like to see that. Anything else that I can help anyone with before we call it a day?
Yes, Cindy had a question about an Adobe Acrobat plugin for PowerPoint. I'm pretty sure it has the same tab in PowerPoint.
Ooh, you know what? I've got PowerPoint open here. Let me see.
Yeah, it has the
there we
Acrobat
go. I've
one.
never used it.
I've used it before a lot. It's great.
So I don't have any expertise in that regard. You might be able to speak to that one, Cynthia, but I'm sure it works in a very similar way.
It does. It's almost exactly the same as you do, except you don't have the headings things.
Yeah, I was just going to say in preferences, it's only settings and security, so headings wouldn't really apply. Yeah.
But it does a really good job of creating the PDFs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's nice to see. So I'm glad that's available for all of Office. Mm-hmm. But it's in Excel too. I just haven't checked. I've never had to use it anywhere besides Word.
It is in Excel as well. Any other questions for Corinne? Well, thank you very much, Corinne. This has been great. I'm glad we were able to get to these more advanced things that we weren't able to get to at the forum, because
yeah, and it still doesn't feel long enough. Like it.
We could have more.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, this was great. It's fantastic. And just to remind folks that I will be posting the recording up on the website. The initial recording I do post won't be accessible, but because I have to actually do the closed captioning sort of manually after it gets converted by YouTube. So it takes a lot of time to make it accessible. But for now, you will be able to see the raw video. And I also will post the slides that Corinne shared with us as well.
Yeah, and the notes that I sent you, the
Yes.
webinar notes, it's literally just a Word document with instructions. So that might be very useful to people because it has all the fussy little details about whether you're going to, the right-hand menu, the left-hand menu, where this is found, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all there.
Yep, I will definitely post that.
Great.
So thank you very much, Corinne. And if, like as Corinne said, if you have any follow-up questions, she'd be more than happy for you to email her and ask her questions.
Certainly. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for your attention.